Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 14th of December 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott. David bringing us Northern exposure, of course, from north of the border in Bonnie, Scotland.
Well, we should get straight on because we've got lots to get through. And of course, Michelle Barnier back to work this morning with the UK negotiating team. Brexit, of course, Brexit without the exit continues. So negotiators are they're going to push a new push to reach agreement on post-Brexit trade. That's what the BBC said. Is it really about trade? We'll come on to that in a second. But let's first of all just remind ourselves of what Ursula von der Leyen had to say about this over the weekend.
Good afternoon. I had a constructive and useful phone call with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We discussed the major unsolved topics. Our negotiation teams have been working day and night over the recent days, and despite the exhaustion after almost 1 year of negotiations, and despite the fact that deadlines have been missed over and over, we both think that it is responsible at this point in time to go the extra mile. We have accordingly mandated our negotiators to continue the talks and to see whether an agreement can be reached, even at this late stage. The negotiations continue here in Brussels. Thank you so much.
Right, I let that run on because I just had to let everybody see her putting her mask on. It was really an important point there.
COVID was not a problem during the speech, but immediately afterwards it crept into the room.
Yes, apparently, yes. But David Brown's just whispered in my ear. Of course, she wasn't being very EU because it should have been go the extra kilometre.
Well, you see here you see why they need us in the European community, because we bring with us the strongest cliches in the world.
We do indeed. Now, sorry, go ahead.
And you need cliches to detract from the vagueness. Major unsolved topics. What would they be?
Well, we'll consider that in a second. Now, that was, by the way, she didn't make those words up. That was a joint statement by her and Boris Johnson. Both sides put out exactly the same words. But yesterday on the Andrew Marr programme on BBC, the Irish Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, was on. And well, maybe he gives us a clue as to what these extra topics are that require the extra mile. So let's just have a first listen to him.
In my view, it's extremely important that the future relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe is a solid one, not just in terms of tariff-free and quota-free trade, but also in terms of politics, judicial cooperation, security cooperation, aviation, transport, energy. It's important that we have a good future relationship deal between Europe and the United Kingdom, given the geopolitical challenges we are facing, but also because we represent people, workers, employers, who need the certainty and the clarity of such a deal.
Okay, so does that make you feel better, David? Because for the first time, unchallenged, by the way, by Andrew Marr, we've had a European leader spelling out exactly what it is that the UK column has been spelling out. We've been highlighting the fact that this deal is much broader than just an economic playing field, an economic trade agreement with a level playing field. It's also the security partnership, it's judicial, it's policing, it's intelligence sharing. It's a whole range of topics aside from that, which the British government does not want to discuss, at least publicly in the mainstream press. I mean.
Oh, that's for sure. Yes, that sounded like staying in. Aviation, security, which is obviously police, military, intelligence, and everything else. Politics. I thought we left a political union. I don't know.
No, well, indeed, that is the key point, and we'll say it again because this really is the key point. Brexit without the exit, because of course we left the treaties on the 31st of December 2019, and we're supposed to be leaving the transition period on the 31st of December 2020, but we leave that transition period potentially with a future relationship which, if we remember what Theresa May and Boris Johnson at times have said, will have greater breadth and depth than we have ever seen before. So they took us out, they're bringing us back in. But Micheál Martin had a little bit more to say on this. Just have a listen to this.
Well, I think the level playing field area is one that has bedeviled the talks from the outset. In my view, with some degree of creativity, a resolution can be found in that area. And I think if you know, the United Kingdom exports heavily into the European Union market, indeed into Ireland as well. And Ireland would be the 5th largest market for the destination of British goods and services, which is probably not widely known, at about 38 billion. China comes next at about 30 billion. That illustrates the interdependence between our two economies. And so, in my view, Britain has a lot to gain through access, obviously, to the European market. And I think a resolution mechanism, or a mechanism to resolve any future disputes, is one that both sides, with a bit of creativity, could sign up to. And I think, you know, 97% of this deal has been negotiated across the judicial, security, research, a whole range of areas. And it seems to me that the remaining 3% should not be beyond the capacity of both sides to bridge.
So now what he was talking about there in the middle of that was dispute resolution. On Friday's programme, David, I suggested that part of what's going on here, because in that interview, Micheál Martin was talking about the new Biden presidency, about the fact that Biden is much more likely to pursue a multilateral view of the world, and that the EU wants to bring the United States into this whole scenario as well. And so on Friday, I was pointing out that you know, Britain's trade policy really was, up to a point, totally engaged with the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Now, one of the reasons why that failed as a deal at the end of the day was because there was so much opposition to the dispute resolution mechanism. And here we have Micheál Martin really expressing an EU view that dispute resolution is a very key part. It's clearly one of the sticking points. And of course, as from Boris Johnson's point of view, he has to try to sell a dispute resolution mechanism which doesn't involve the European Court of Justice, which at the moment any dispute resolution would. But nonetheless, there's much more to what's going on here than just trade. And he reiterated it once again there. It's security, defence, intelligence, policing, judicial. And this just isn't being discussed. And he wasn't challenged on that, as I say, by Andrew Marr at all.
He wasn't. And he seemed to be working on the basis that both judicial and security matters were resolved. They were all agreed. They were part of the 97%. So if the defence of the realm is agreed, and the courts and how they interact with Europe, and the courts are very much the heart of our country in many ways, and that's agreed, do you think it might be possible if somebody would tell the British people?
You would think that would be a requirement, but apparently not.
You'd think it'd be a requirement, but of course it's not a good idea, because if the British people knew what was actually being done without their knowledge, they would be extremely angry, and I think we'd be well on our way to stopping it. So deceit, of course, is the biggest weapon of Boris Johnson's government at the moment. Well, let's just hop across to the Atlantic, and I think it was Friday I was hearing in a personal capacity, because we've got some family living in California, that California was going into lockdown. This prompted some interesting transatlantic conversation in a family sense. But thank you very much to the viewer who pointed out this clip with Jake Tapper, I think the gentleman's name is, interviewing Bill Gates on CNN. This is from about a day ago. So let's follow this little question and answer session through, because it's fascinating. So Tapper started out with saying that people in California are right now under brand new stay-at-home orders. There's hospitals, there's a risk of being overwhelmed. There are lots of governors who oppose these lockdown orders and forcing businesses to close. What do you think? Do you think more states need to be taking that kind of drastic action we saw when the pandemic first began, or can there be a more nuanced approach? Well, in came Bill Gates, and we've labelled him on screen here as an unqualified medical expert, which of course he is. He said straight off that, well, certainly mask wearing has essentially no downside and they're not expensive. I wonder, David, whether we can just comment on that. It's fascinating that this completely unqualified man, his only qualification is he's immensely wealthy, simply states there are no risks, there are no downsides whatsoever to masks, and the benefit is, of course, they're cheap.
This comes to the questions: is Bill Gates actually just stupid? Is he just dim, or is he lying on purpose? Because we know that the oxygen levels that people breathe in go down when they wear a mask, down below levels which, if it were in a tunnel on a construction site, would sound alarms and have immediate evacuation. That's a bit of an issue, surely. We know that bacteria growths are discoverable on masks, many of them, after less than 1 day of use. So that's been held right next to your airway the whole time. We don't know what the long-term consequences of mask wearing is. There have been some deaths in China. 2 boys died in PE lessons whilst wearing masks. There have been other rumours which we haven't really quite got to the bottom of. But there sits Bill Gates, pronouncing that there is no downside. Yep. I think Bill Gates is lying to us, but it is possible that he's just dim.
He's just, Tim dim and not very nice. Well, he went on to say this, that bars and restaurants in most of the country will close as we go into this wave, and I think sadly that is appropriate. Depending on how severe it is, the decision on schools is much more complicated as the benefits are kind of high. The amount of transmission is not the same as in restaurants and bars. Be interesting to see some scientific proof on all that, Mike, but of course there is none. He doesn't need any.
Maybe it's because there's no laughing in US schools, perhaps.
Well, we come on to laughing in a minute, actually. So trade-offs will have to be made, but this next 4 to 6 months really call on us to do our best, because we can see that this will end, and you don't want somebody you love to be the last to die of coronavirus. I thought that was a classic line that some publicist had given him in order to try and interfere with our emotions. But the CNN guy came back. He said, when do you think life will fully return to what we thought of was normal back in January? No masks, no social distancing, no other protective measures necessary. And at this point, Bill Gates took a huge swig of tea. And I find this very significant. I'll come on to something else. Certainly by the summer, we'll be way closer to normal. He laughs. It's a bit difficult to hear what he says initially there, but it's something close to that. So we'll be way closer to normal than we are now. But even through early 2022, unless we help other countries get rid of this disease. So this was all said with him needing to take a swig of tea. And I'm going to say, because I think he knew that he was not telling the truth at this point, he then went on to start rubbing his face. And we get high vaccination rates in our country. The risk of reintroduction will be there. And of course, the global economy will be slowed down, which hurts America economically in a pretty dramatic way. So we will have starting in the summer about 9 months where a few things like big public gatherings will still be restricted. We can see now somewhere in 12 to 18 months we have a chance, if we manage it well, to get back to normal. And he was interfering with his face the whole time, which I believe is a big no-no in this COVID environment. We're not qualified to comment in applied psychology, but to me he was deeply uncomfortable with what he was saying. And I'll just point out that this particular newsreader put out quite a good hit piece on Trump recently. This headline caught my eye because he'd got, "Thank you, President Trump, for exposing those who supported your assault on democracy. So I just thought that maybe Mr. Trapper was not the man who was going to get the truth out about COVID.
Well, we'll have more on Donald Trump a little bit later. But in the meantime, Brian, I thought it would be worthwhile looking back. For those of you that were watching the UK Column News back from the beginning of this whole COVID situation, one of the statistical agencies that we were very keen to present information from was Euromomo, which is presenting information right across the EU, and it's all extremely legitimate data. And so I thought we'd bring ourselves back onto that site and have a look at the situation we're in at the moment. This is Europe-wide at the moment. This is the situation for all-cause mortality. Now, it has to be said, this is really only the only counter that can't really be fiddled unless you just remove people from the register altogether or add people that don't exist. But you can't sort of attribute a particular death to a particular thing. It's either somebody's dead or they're not. So this is the least fiddleable figure to go on. And what I just want to highlight there, if we look on the right-hand side of that graph, is that we're not even close to the peak of April, and in fact, very similar to peaks from previous years. So the drive for vaccination is why? That's really the question. Let's look at the map, and we can see excess mortality across Europe, a little bit higher in Italy, but France, the UK, all pretty normal. And if we look at the figures for England and Scotland there, again, massively well below the peak from the beginning of the year in both countries. And if we look at Wales, well, Wales is claiming that its deaths are going through the roof at the moment and that they need perhaps to cancel Christmas. I'm not really seeing any evidence of that in those figures, so I'd like to know where the Welsh government is getting the justification for it. Northern Ireland, absolutely nothing unusual going on there at all. So David, that looks pretty clear to me, and maybe you could give me some insight into why we are needing to have a mass vaccination rollout.
Well, it's unrelated to any threat. That's the first point. Secondly, it seems to be more of a narrative than a reality. If we turned off the TV, if no one was telling you to be afraid, if no one was saying there's a terrible pandemic and we all must wear masks and hide and avoid our neighbours, would anybody know? I don't think they would. There's no sign of it. There's no crowded hospitals. There's no abnormal deaths. What exactly is this about? It's not about public health. Can't be. Doesn't make any sense.
For sure. But let's look at The Guardian here, because they've got this headline. I'm sure others have written this up as well. Dozens of GP practices in England opt out of COVID vaccine rollout. So this is a bit devastating for the government. Perhaps they're saying that basically the GP surgeries in some parts of the world, particularly in the northwest, are refusing to get involved in the vaccine rollout on the basis that they're being asked to commit to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week of vaccinations, and they don't have the staff for them. And what they're saying is that if they were to get involved in this, that would have an impact on the normal day-to-day services that they're supposed to be providing. And David, I find this fascinating because, of course, the hospitals didn't take the same attitude. The hospitals decided that in the first half of the year that they were going to basically suspend the normal day-to-day operations, the normal day-to-day services that they're supposed to provide in favour of a complete reorientation towards COVID-19. And if you happen to have a stroke, tough luck. Some GP surgeries seem to be refusing that particular path with perhaps an understanding of the implications for their patients.
Yes, GP surgeries are actually sort of privately owned by the doctors that run them, contracted to the NHS. And they obviously have the people who actually manage and own these organisations have a personal relationship with the parents. Unlike the NHS, where the senior management is, shall we say, aloof, is remote from the patients. The doctors are possibly not. So they're taking a different view. And I'd also point out that many of the nurses and medical staff in the hospitals are taking a different view. An overheard conversation in the supermarket in the last week made reference to huge numbers of, quote, conspiracy theory nurses who are refusing to take the vaccine. Apparently, Perth Royal Infirmary is full of them.
Yes, I think that is a problem, in inverted commas, that is being seen right across the NHS. But let's then come on to the BBC. And here we go. They're particularly concerned, it seems, about how the vaccine was getting approved. So they produced another piece of, well, what do we call it, propaganda. I just wanted to highlight this particular sentence from this website. It was also repeated in the video clip itself. Some people have been surprised to learn how a process which usually takes at least 10 years could have been done in less than one. Now, I find that a particularly disingenuous statement because, of course, it wasn't done in less than 1 year. It was done in significantly less than 1 year. It was done in several months, a few months. And the implication from it being done in less than one, maybe a little bit less than one, the idea of 1 year is still in people's minds. It was significantly less than 1 year, about 6 months at best. And there is no evidence, as far as I can see, that there backs up the idea that any of these vaccines are safe. But look, I just wanted to make a quick correction to what I presented on Friday. This was the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee meeting from the Food and Drug Administration, which said that in a mid-November analysis of 36,621 participants randomized 1-to-1 to vaccine or placebo, efficacy was 95%. And I was really making the point that that 95% figure was coming from the idea of relative risk. Now, I'll come on to that in 1 second. It was just as a side point here, I just want to make the point that that number 36,621 is different to the equivalent number, which I can't remember off the top of my head, from the UK version of this document, which we also showed in last week's programme. The UK version of the document also mentioned 8 COVID cases with the vaccine and 162 COVID cases in the placebo group. So why there is a difference in the total number of people that are being included in the analysis, I'm not entirely clear. But anyway, 95%. If you remember, we showed the relative risk calculation last week. And this line here, this third line, is where I'd made the mistake. And thank you to the people that were sharp enough to pick this up, because I put a typo in when I did that division. I put an extra 0. I last week had 0.0049. The correct answer is 0.049. Didn't make a change to the ultimate answer on the bottom line. It was just a typographical error in the slide. And the key point here is relative risk, of course, doesn't show anything. We're giving that a big nonsense mark. It's absolute risk that is the key point here. And when you work out that calculation, you discover that the absolute risk reduction as a result of taking the vaccine is a mere 0.8%. And of course, that doesn't take into account many variables, which might make it tend towards 0%.
But we're not seeing the BBC produce that figure,
no,
Mike, or,
no.
or the government or other reliable people who are promoting the vaccine.
That's absolutely correct. So anyway, I just wanted to make that clear for the people that highlighted the fact I put an extra 0 in there. I do apologise for that, but it didn't make any difference to the point. Now, let's move on. And David, Mark Sedwill, who of course has recently retired as being king of the UK, and de facto at least, in the sense that he was head of the British Civil Service, head of the National Security, he was National Security Advisor and also head of the Cabinet Office. Well, he has got a new job, and what a job he has.
Well, he's done quite nicely for himself. He's got a job with the Rothschild & Co. Bank. They want to have him very much. This is his first major private sector role. Obviously, it won't be his last. He's going to be a senior advisor to the global firm. Lord Sedwill will aim to help Rothschild, quote, achieve their strategic global ambitions, as well as helping to connect to and advise clients across the global advisory, wealth and asset management and merchant banking businesses. So there we go. So he's going to help Rothschild achieve their ends but at least this time, it's actually on the job description.
Yes.
It would be nice to know what Rothschild's global ambitions actually are. That could focus our thought process considerably on
domination, I would have thought.
World domination by the banks is, yes, probably the best guess that we'll put forward today.
Yeah.
Okay.
He has got certain restrictions placed on him as to what he can do for up to 2 years after leaving government. He's not allowed to reveal certain facts to his new employer that he learned as a member of the civil service.
And of course, we would trust him to keep his mouth shut, wouldn't we?
But I think that rule is actually that he can mention them, but they mustn't become public. You have to think about that.
Yes. Okay, well, look, let's come back to vaccination for a little second. This is The Sun. Anti-vaxxer dead, Brandy Vaughan dead. Anti-vaxxer activist who founded Learn the Risk is found dead by Sun 9. What's going on, David?
Well, this is very interesting, right? So this is a Brandy Vaughan worked for Merck. She sold drugs for Merck, and she found out that what she was selling was actually harming people. It was increasing stroke and heart attack risk twofold, and the company knew and wasn't being honest with the people who were receiving the product. So she whistleblew on this. She subsequently went back to the United States and found herself in conflict with her medical advisors whenever she asked questions about vaccinations, and she found the response very hostile. So this prompted her, her lack of trust in the drug company, which she'd seen from the inside, prompted her to set up an organisation to explain what the risks were in vaccination. Now, she was under a lot of pressure. She was under a lot of harassment. She was making videos about some of the harassment, break-ins, strange things happening in her home, things which appeared to be done to intimidate her. And then she was found dead by her son, ironically enough, the day before the COVID vaccine was launched, by a strange coincidence. She said, from that experience, that's with the drug industry, I realised that just because it's on the market doesn't mean it's safe. Much of what we are told by the healthcare industry simply isn't the truth. Upon returning to the States with a vaccine-free son, she was bullied at the paediatrician's office and asked questions that every parent, when she asked questions that every parent should like to ask. What are the ingredients in these vaccines? How come children in other countries are healthier but receive fewer vaccines? Now, because of the harassment she was receiving, just under a year ago, she posted a warning in case she turned up mysteriously dead. It was headed, "The post I wish I didn't have to write." But given certain sudden tragedies over the last couple of years, I feel it's absolutely necessary to post these 10 facts. Amongst those facts are, I have never had thoughts of taking my own life, not once, even before I had my son. I have a huge mission in life. Even when they make it very difficult and scary, I would never take my own life, period. So she goes on and explains that her health is good, and if there is any, if there's an unexplained death, she's no longer alive, she wants it investigated, and she asks that a crowdfunder be set up to help that investigation and to highlight what has happened to her, and ask people to dig deeply into her demise. And now she's dead. She was a young woman. She was in fine health, without any underlying medical problems, and she had everything to live for. And it is very strange under those circumstances that her son should find her dead, and very strange that it should be the day before the launch of the COVID vaccine. And I think it's to the credit of the Sun that they reported on this, and it's an issue and an area and a story that we should all watch and highlight if any information comes to the fore.
Yeah, Well, I think we must agree with that. And of course, on the internet is a great deal of information about the deaths of doctors, particularly those in a deep level of bio research who've been found dead, particularly in America. So a lot more needs to be discovered about her particular death.
Okay, let's move on to this Metro article. This is a firm linked to Matt Hancock's family given £5.5 million mobile testing contract. So what they're saying here is a firm believed to have links to Matt Hancock's family have been awarded £5.5 million contract. The deal was struck with EMS Healthcare, whose chairman Ian Johnson is said to be a former business partner of Hancock's mum and stepdad, Shirley and Robert Carter. And this is according to an article in the Byline Times. And they say the details of the deal published yesterday show the company was awarded the contract to supply testing units to the Department of Health and Social Care. The contract began on the 15th of September and it will run until the 14th of September 2021. There is no evidence to suggest Hancock or his family were involved in the arrangement of the contract. But this raises questions, and interesting little link in that particular article, because it links to this post here, My Little Crony. It's on a website that sort of creates one of these maps of connections between various people. And if you select Matt Hancock, well, there's a couple of other connections come up which raise questions as well. And one of those is the connections to this organization here, Tulchan Group. Now, Tulchan Group is a PR organization, and for the first 6 months of this coronavirus so-called pandemic, Tulchan was running daily briefings, in fact, twice daily briefings for the mainstream press. And what they did was help the mainstream press build their narrative to justify the lockdown, to justify this the future vaccine agenda and the testing agenda. So what that little diagram shows, if you click on the Tulchan link, is that on the 1st of April, Matt Hancock was holding a meeting with the Office for Life Sciences, also with Oxford Nanopore, and both, Oxford Nanopore is well up there in the list of companies that's going to be providing rapid testing, to discuss the government's testing ambition. And they're showing that Tulchan Group was involved in that meeting. And so we should point out that Tulchan Group is one of their managing partners is former Conservative Party chairman, Lord Andrew Feldman. And he was recently asked by the Department of Health and Social Care to assist with its coronavirus response. So it seems that, Brian, that no matter where you look, you find these connections to the companies, whether it be through shares, through secret meetings that nobody really was told about at the time, linking PR companies to make sure that a particular narrative is pushed out through the mainstream press, and also companies that are providing testing services. It all gets, I mean, the little crony doesn't seem to go far enough.
It's a criminal network. Like this is not just cronies. This is deals being done with public money. This is a criminal network. And of course, many years ago, we were warning that the political charity Common Purpose was in having meetings at cabinet office level. Francis Maude was one of the people who was present, and then Common Purpose was going to get a contract. And what happens? They massaged the minutes of the meeting so it wasn't clear to the public what was going on until we challenged them, and then those minutes were changed back to what they should have been in the first place. So, David, I don't think there's any doubt you've described it as a government of occupation. It isn't just a government of occupation in a political sense. This is a criminal cabal which has taken over our government system from the inside.
You know what a Tulchan is?
Tell us.
Tulchan Group. Tulchan was in Scotland a man appointed as a bishop after the Reformation, who was a bishop in name only, and whose revenue was actually drawn by his patron.
That's
just a coincidence.
That's just a coincidence. It's just the same as having the link between Satanism and a certain gentleman's hedge fund. It's a pure coincidence. Well, let's remind our audience about the network of the government fear propaganda around COVID-19. I think this is important to do because if you really want to understand how this is working, we can look at a few key components. So the government, well, we're going to call it the government of occupation, but the power base is through and around the Cabinet Office. And remember, we've already reported that we're now dealing with perhaps 17,000 people as part of that Cabinet Office empire. But they've built up the SAGE Scientific Support Team. That's the body claims to be independent, but of course it isn't, which is pumping out the initial level of fear propaganda to the public over COVID. But behind the scenes, we've got the Behavioural Insights team. Now, this was birthed out of the UK government originally, although it's operating as some form of social community enterprise now. But this was the team which was working on how to use applied political psychology to get people to do things. And in their Mindspace document, back in 2010, they boasted that they could change the way people thought and behaved, and people wouldn't even know this had been done to them. So immensely dangerous people, and I'm going to have to use that word. They're celebrating 10 years from 2010 there. So you can find that if you go on their website, they've got a little 10-year bubbly "Haven't We Done Well" sticker. But of course, what are they doing? They're pumping their expertise in twisting the public's mind. This is brainwashing. That's being done through the Spy B group, which is sitting alongside SAGE. And between all of them, they're pushing out the fear. They're skewing the Office of National Statistics figures, which in their own right are pretty reliable, but those figures are being skewed and misused, and the agenda is to ramp up fear. And of course, the BBC is the lead at pumping that out. So these are the key pieces people need to be aware about. And we're going to say to our audience, research the people. We'll give you a bit of help here, because if you go to the Behavioural Insights team, this is their global board. So I don't know whether they're aligned to your Rothschild Bank story there, David, because they're thinking in global terms. They need a global board. We've got Rob Taylor, chair. He's a former banker, but he's also been involved with creative arts industries. We've got one of the key players, Dr. David Halpin. People should really get into the research on this man. But if you look at his background, not a lot of psychology, but a lot of researching. He was a researcher and a chief analyst for the PM strategy unit. We've got a mysterious lady, Janet Baker, from the Cabinet Office. I could not find anything on her. So she's really up to something very interesting, but we can't see it. So if the audience can give us some help. We've got Ian West, Director of Finance. Well, he's got a sort of charity media accountant background. We've got Nathan Elstub, Nesta. If you don't know what Nesta is, please go and research it. But strangely enough, that links back to a gentleman called Jeff Mulgan, who's the chief executive of Nesta. And it was Jeff Mulgan who was in post working alongside the Cameron government and Julia Middleton from Common Purpose, when Common Purpose was being used to get inside the civil service. We've got Elizabeth Costa, market expert, formerly of the Australian Treasury. So presumably this is the global flavour. And we've got Nikki Kerr, who's a psychological expert, solicitor, but done work with the Treasury and the Cabinet Office. And if we take it on a bit further, the Behavioural Insights team has got a US board. There's April Chow. She's interesting because she's an education expert. Here's the focus on the children again. And she's done some work as vice president of the Chan Zuckerberg Community Charity. Any guesses which Zuckerberg that is, Mike?
That'd be Mrs. Zuckerberg.
That'll be Mr. Facebook.
Yeah, but that's Mrs. Facebook.
Oh, Mrs. Facebook.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
okay.
but that's his wife.
Oh, that's his wife.
Yes.
So we've done a bit of research while the news is live. We've got this gentleman, Cass Sunstein, US behavioural guru, chair of the World Health Organization Technical Advisory Group, Behavioural Insights and Sciences for for sciences, and he's also health advisor to the UN, EU, and World Bank. And it's not surprising, therefore, that we're seeing these World Health Organization behavioural documents also pushing for vaccine. But we got more politics here with this gentleman, Corey Arnes Griffin, President Global Government and Industry Partners. I don't get a warm feeling about that. I should imagine the Rothschild Bank's in there somewhere. But he was appointed also as an assistant director of the US Office of Strategic Partnerships, and that was an Obama appointee. And we've also got other people here. We can bring them up on screen. These are what are known as academic affiliates. And I think we're going to have to let the audience get into these people and see who they are. But of course, none of them, you would say, are ordinary individuals who've got the health and welfare of the UK in their minds. They all seem to be fully of a globalist agenda. And I'll just end with this little bit here, that thank you very much for somebody pointing out this House of Commons briefing document from the 9th of December, UK vaccination policy. In the end, or at the end of it, it's talking about mandatory vaccination. But although it's saying we're not going to go to mandatory vaccination, but it quotes the Nuffield Council on Bioethics here. And it says this: in general, public health policy should use the least intrusive means to achieve the required public health benefit. Directive vaccination approaches that go further than simply providing information and encouragement to take up the vaccine may, however, be justified on the basis of minimizing risks of harm to others or protecting the health of children and other vulnerable people. A case-by-case assessment will always be required. So directive vaccination approaches, it's fascinating language, but it then goes on and it says, in this document, it added that quasi-mandatory approaches can be ethically justified for highly contagious and serious disease, and if eradication is within reach. David, you're pretty good on what things mean. Quasi-mandatory, I just find a beautiful term. Does that mean we're not going to say it's mandatory? We're just going to bully you into doing it? We're going to blackmail you into doing it? Is that quasi-mandatory?
I'm not sure, because saying that it's not mandatory and bullying you into it is called standard operating procedure. That happens everywhere all the time. When we're not tricking you into it. If it's actually been called quasi-mandatory, I think that probably means it's mandatory, but it's illegal, but we're doing it anyway.
It's illegal, but we're doing it anyway. Well, I think you're probably right on that little bit of analysis, which just reminds people that there's a really excellent article on the UK Column website, Behavioural Insights, the second team leading the UK government's COVID-19 response. That was by Martin Edwards, was posted on the 3rd of May 2020, and encourage people to get into that and actually have a look at the detail about this applied political psychology to influence the way we think.
And share it, please. Please share it as widely as possible. Now, David, Scotland then, anti-lockdown protests, more arrests?
More arrests. 4 men arrested over anti-lockdown protest. This is in Edinburgh. A group of 70 marchers moved from outside the Scottish Parliament to the First Minister's official residence, Bute House, on Saturday. Police Scotland said marches are currently illegal under coronavirus measures, and they arrested 4 men, aged 37, 31, 53 and 31. So this is basically, they've picked some victims, because how do you intimidate people if you say, well, the marches are illegal and people turn up in march? Well, what you do is you pick a few of them, and you arrest them for no very good reason, and you then suggest that they're going to have huge fines and great legal problems, and you schedule the trials for months in the future, and leave some of them with restrictive bail conditions. So this is how you intimidate people, using the police, using the legal system, and claiming it's lawful. If you want more on that concept, I suggest people tune into our podcast series, A Dissident's Guide to the Constitution. Now we've got a few photographs from the march here. Here we see Di Meakin holding up a poster that says freedomalliance.co.uk and also says freedom is for life, not just for Christmas. And so she escaped arrest, and here you see a man being arrested and bundled into the back of a van. Now the question is, why did they pick that guy? Because there were 70 people there and they were all doing essentially the same thing. Why did they pick that man? Well, it seems to be that Police Scotland are saying, well, what we do is we engage with the public and we give them advice, and we only use arrest and enforcement measures if it's absolutely essential. What that man did is he talked to the police officers. And that's the first part of the process towards being arrested, because you're now engaging. So that ticks the first box, I've engaged, and they'll give you some advice. And you'll say, no, this makes no sense at all. So that ticks the second box, they've now given you advice. They can now arrest you. So I would say if anyone is in any conflict situation with the police, don't talk to the police at all, because it will simply be used to engineer your arrest.
I think that's very good advice, David. We have the right to remain silent, and we should exercise that right as much as we possibly can. Now, let's just quick advertisement here. Last week, David, you mentioned Samantha Baldwin's book. Just remind us who Samantha is and what the book's about.
Samantha is an enormously brave mother of 2 children who have been subject to abuse and who have been handed over by the family courts to the abuser. Samantha has been vilified by the family courts, targeted, and had many actions taken against her to suppress her freedom, but she still speaks out on behalf of her sons. She has written a book. It's called Everything is Going to Be Okay. It's written as a novel, but it's her story in novel form, and it considers her story up to the point where she's sitting after the courts have decided what's going to happen to her sons. She hasn't yet heard officially yet, but the next thing that happens is the police raid the building which she's in and seize her children quite literally out of her arms, having suspended all police investigation into murders in the entire county in order to engage in a manhunt for this single and very caring mother. Now, the book's excellent. It's written in an extremely accessible, readable style. It recounts her experiences and is well worth the read if people want to find out just what sort of country they live in. I would say that the narrative probably goes a little more than a third of the way through the overall story, and at the end of the book she's giving factual information about CSA and SRA, Satanist ritual abuse, and she's giving some advice based on her experience. I suspect there are more books in Samantha Baldwin, and this won't be the last piece of writing we see from her. I'm very happy to say that the UK column is going to be able to offer this book for sale through our website as well very shortly, so more on that later.
But if anybody wants to listen to the 5 interviews that you did with her, they are on the Northern Exposure YouTube channel, also on the Northern Exposure section of the UK column website.
Yes, the interviews are excellent. She explains her position, her case extremely well, very calmly and coolly, so you can understand exactly what's happened to her. And I would encourage anyone who wants to find out what sort of country we actually live in and what sort of authorities we live under to watch the Samantha Baldwin interviews.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, David. Well, following on from that subject matter, we just wanted to give an update on Wilfred Wong. Now, on the 10th of November, we reported this, that Wilfred Wong, who's been a very long-standing and widely respected campaigner for child protection, but particularly against ritualistic abuse of children, He was reported as having been arrested following what the mainstream media described as a kidnap at knife point of a child, and a car was stopped with a number of people in it by armed police on the motorway. Interestingly, the only photograph shown of the group was of Wilfred Wong, and as can be seen by the inset image here, the Mirror in particular focused on the fact that he was clearly in chains, and we felt there was something significant. Well, what happened a little bit later was tragic, because one of the people arrested was then found dead in their prison cell. This was reported here by North Wales Live. Anglesey child kidnap accused found dead in prison cell, inquest hears. A man charged with an alleged child kidnapping on Anglesey was found dead in his prison cell. Robert Frith of Tin Park, Holyhead, was discovered suffocated in his bed at HMP Baldwin in Wrexham just after 8:30 on November the 14th. So, of course, the prisons charged with protection, people in prison are all very vulnerable because they have no freedoms to look after themselves. So the prison here clearly failed in at least one respect, that a key person to this case has died. And this was the original report in the North Wales Chronicle. So it said that the people arrested were Dr. Anchor Hill, a Jane Going Hill, her partner Robert Frith, the gentleman who unfortunately has died, husband and wife Edward Stevenson and Janet Stevenson, and also Wilfred Wong is listed there. Now we understand that Dr. Anchor Hill, who we believe is the mother of the child, and the other lady Going Hill, I think they are related, indicated that they would plead guilty. We've got one defendant already dead, and we understand that the remainder of those people, including Wilfred Wong, are pleading not guilty. Obviously, it's going to be difficult to see how that plays out if you already have two that have pleaded guilty, but I can imagine they would have been put under huge pressure by the system. If anybody wants to know more about Wilfred Wong, if you go to the UK column and simply search for his name in our search box, you'll come up with a number of interviews that we did with Wilfred Wong, and you can see the calibre of the man. But this case has all the hallmarks of a government-controlled case in the UK, and of course the British government heavily involved in the taking of children from families through secret courts, and anybody who dares try to interrupt that process can expect the full force of the law, as it's called, to be unleashed on them.
Okay, we're just going to briefly move on to defence here, because Ben Wallace was giving a presentation just before the weekend on the future of the British Armed Forces to RUSI, which is the Royal United Services Institute. Now, on Friday I was talking about the possibility that Britain is positioning itself to be the glue that binds together global institutions, for example, European trade with US trade and so on. But this also applies to defence as well. So just briefly have a listen to this.
We have a tendency in the West to divide conflict between war fighting, the violent activity of a proper so-called shooting war, and the sub-threshold, everything before the shooting starts, when in fact today's conflict is carried out through typically non-violent but undoubtedly hostile activities. The division might give comfort to our rule of law approach, but it drives a static war and peace disposition. This makes us deeply vulnerable to those who don't play by the same rules, especially below the threshold.
So this is echoing comments by the Chief of the Defence Staff, Nick Carter, and previously other senior military figures in the UK that are presenting the idea, including Ben Wallace himself in other speeches, presenting the idea that we are in a situation of perpetual hybrid warfare, that we are just perpetually at war. Disinformation is a big part of that. So following on from that, then Ben Wallace had this to say. He said the widespread use of cyber, organised crime, electronic warfare, proxy fighters and disinformation can be seen on nearly every continent. Only last month, he said, Russia tested the Zircon hypersonic anti-ship and land attack missile, which can travel at Mach 9, outranging and outpacing even its predecessors and creating new challenges for countermeasures. We must work with allies to make the most of new technologies, improve integration across all domains and throughout the spectrum of conflict. Improve integration, this is a key point. The Secretary of State's Office of Net Assessment and Challenge will encompass wargaming, doctrine, red teaming, and external academic analysis. So we're starting to see fusion creeping in here with bringing in academic advice from outside, but the establishment of new institutions within the Ministry of Defence, within government, in this case called the Secretary of State's Office of Net Assessment and Challenge. And he said, in the autumn, the Chief of Defence Staff set out his plans for how we will operate through the integrated operating concept. And this is the glue part of it, because well, let's just briefly listen to what Nick Carter had to say here.
My view is that more of the same will not be enough. We must fundamentally change our thinking if we are not to be overwhelmed. Hence, we are launching this integrated operating concept. We have to modernise. We must chart a direction of travel from an industrial age of platforms to an information age of systems. Warfare is increasingly about a competition between hiding and finding. It will be enabled at every level by a digital backbone into which all sensors, effectors, and deciders will be plugged. This means that some industrial age capabilities will increasingly have to meet their sunset to create the space for capabilities needed for sunrise.
So that speech was given to Policy Exchange, I think, at the end of October. And David, the thing that strikes me about this is that the UK military, at least at the highest levels, is talking about sunsetting these so-called industrial platforms, replacing them with cyber, with counter disinformation, in inverted commas, and this type of hybrid approach. But also, as we've already highlighted, through the use of advanced communications, low Earth orbit satellite constellations, as they're calling them, and so on, providing effectively the communications infrastructure for the integration, for the unification. And as we've pointed out before, this isn't just about European defence unification, but actually now that Pompeo and the US have admitted that they want to get involved in European Defence Union as well, this is military unification, full stop. So Britain seems to be positioning itself to provide the infrastructure that holds all this stuff together.
It does. I mean, this is where I think things have moved. We were campaigning long and hard, and I think effectively, led by David Ellis, on the downgrading of the UK military in order to roll it into an EU-wide military. And I think that's not proven to be sustainable because the British people won't put up with it. Has another deal been done here? Have we, or have our military, or have the senior people within the military accepted a situation where independence will be lost in exchange for some sort of leading role in the world? Is that what's going on? Are we actually being bought off in some way?
I think the answer to that is yes, is the answer. And of course, we've got this smokescreen language, obfuscatory language being used, so the public doesn't understand what's actually being done behind the scenes.
Yes, let's move briefly on then. Well, David, the government has launched an independent review into the Human Rights Act. So this is an expert panel. They're going to examine the Human Rights Act, how it's operating since the 20 years since it was created. It's going to be led by a former Court of Appeal judge, Sir Peter Gross. We'll come on to him in a second. This is what they're saying about it. The review will deliver the Commission on the Constitution, democracy and rights, and taken together are designed to ensure there's a proper balance between the rights of individuals, our vital national security, and effective government. And this is really the key point. This is a point that we've been trying to make very, very hard on this program over the last number of years, is that the definition of the relationship between us as individuals and the state is being changed. We've tried to explain how it's being changed, what it's being changed into, but it is being changed, and this is why this is vitally important. Here is Sir Peter Gross. He is saying that this will entail an independent process, so we're got to be absolutely happy about that, of careful reflection to consider its workings, whether together with whether, and if so, what reforms might be justified. Now, what's interesting, let's just look at how independent Sir Peter Gross is, because he's also chairman or president, can't remember which, of this organisation, the Slynn Foundation. The Slynn Foundation claims to be an educational charity working with senior judges and justice institutions around the world to improve justice systems and the rule of law, and to enhance professional understanding of human rights, mediation, and European Union law and practice. This isn't about British law. This is about European Union law and bringing that into the UK, that style of law into the UK. So who funds this organisation? Well, the Lord Chancellor's Department, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the British Council, the British Association for Central and Eastern Europe, and the Kurt Engelhorn European Foundation for the Advancement of Medicine. So I leave it up to our viewers and listeners to work out how this organisation and the man who chairs it is effectively being put in charge of a review of human rights legislation in the UK.
Because he's independent, Mike, it's obvious why he's being put in there.
Yes, absolutely. And look, David's already mentioned it, but we'll just mention the Dissident's Guide to the Constitution, and particularly episode 3 in this context, which is all about rights. Do have a look at that. You'll find it at ukcolumn.org/constitution. And so, David, I'd be very interested in your thoughts on this.
I'm struck by the fact that we now have some sort of balance to be struck between individual rights and effective government. Effective, not just, right? Not the government selected by the people or the government following laws which are immutable. No, effective government. Effective. There are many things which were effective government. Not many of them were good, and it's now official policy that our individual rights are going to be kind of eased. You know, just we're going to find a middle way between your pesky rights and effective government. Yeah, we know what way that's going to go.
Yeah, indeed we do. Well, look, let's end then with Donald Trump, David, and well, various news outlets reporting that the Supreme Court has denied or rejected his efforts to get some oversight into the election process.
Yes, so Channel 9 News here, somewhat crowing over the fact the Supreme Court issues 18-word rejection to Trump's election hopes. So the application for the Supreme Court writes, the application for injunctive relief presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is denied. So that's it. So the Supreme Court's not interested. Now, there's obviously more to talk about here. Firstly, this is from MSNBC, and if you thought the BBC was bad and biased on the matter of Trump, try watching MSNBC. It is absolutely vitriolic when it comes to Trump. So they're reporting here, the state of Texas motion is denied for lack of standing under Article 3 of the Constitution. Texas has not demonstrated a judicially cognizable interest in the manner in which another state conducts its elections. So the principle was Texas and 16 other states applied to the Supreme Court to say that these 5 states have had an election which is so fraudulent that it's likely to result in us getting a president that the people did not actually vote for. And the Supreme Court have said they've no standing. It is incredible. But it was passed over by MSNBC with the word fail, and it was dismissed. It was quite a sight to see how they did this. Now, Next, we've got a quote from Marco Rubio, former presidential candidate, who obviously stood against Trump. He writes, according to the left and their partners in the legacy media, the Supreme Court was the appropriate place to legalise abortion and redefine marriage, but it has no business taking up claims regarding a presidential election, which I think is a good point. Right? Again, that was dismissed by MSNBC. But we see here people on the Republican side of politics in America are raising issues, and the court is just running from them. The court's not interested. That's got big implications for the country, because if there's no legal way of resolving this, then there'll need to be another way of resolving the conflict. So the failure of the court to stand up and do its job here may have deep ramifications for the United States of America. I've next got a tweet from Donald Trump. And he put this out just before the Supreme Court ruled. He writes, they get caught because we were leading by so much more than they ever thought possible. The late night ballot dumps went crazy. So the point that Trump's making, and I think it's a valid one, is when you look at the vote count and the sudden and unexplained huge steps up in the Biden count, where box loads, thousands, hundreds of thousands of votes come in, and they're just for Biden, and it just doesn't look right. It looks utterly fraudulent. So what Trump's saying is there was voting irregularities, there was voting fraud going on, but it wasn't enough to cover the victory of the Trump side, and therefore they had to do something that was so obvious to swing the vote in their favour. So that's the Trump position, and it's got evidence to back it. So the Telegraph's reporting this, and they're asking, is this the end of the road for Trump? US Supreme Court rejects lawsuit that tried to overturn the election. Again, a bit of spin there from the Telegraph. I wouldn't quite say that's how it should have been worded. The president has refused to concede the election and has spouted untrue claims that the Democrats won by fraud. So the Telegraph is complying with the official narrative here. It's Trump's just lying. It's just untrue claims, despite all of the bits of evidence that we've seen and the sheer unbelievability of the voting patterns that are claimed to be non-fraudulent. The Telegraph is just going along with this. They continue to report here. The Supreme Court on Friday brought an abrupt end to the long-shot lawsuit filed by Texas and backed by President Donald Trump, seeking to throw out voting results in 4 states, dealing him a crushing setback in his quest to undo his election loss to President-elect Joe Biden. Now, they then go on to quote the court here, that Texas has not demonstrated a judicially cognizable interest, etc. Now, the Telegraph also have a couple of quotes here. Our one here is from Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, and he said this on Twitter apparently, although it's not there now. He said, quote, our nation's highest court saw through this seditious abuse of our electoral process. So he's accusing the President of the United States of sedition there. So this shows you how charged the language is getting and how entrenched the positions are getting. And this is very significant, I think. Alan West, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, said the Supreme Court's order had established, quote, a precedent that says states can violate the US Constitution and not be held accountable. And he suggested the formation of, quote, a union of states that will abide by the Constitution, end quote. That's a call for secession. That's a call for separation of the United States into 2 separate countries. So that's how serious it's got. That's in the Telegraph report, but it's not the main subject of the Telegraph report. They're just talking about, oh, Trump's a bad loser. Trump's not recognising he's lost. If you look here, we've got a map of the states that backed the Texas lawsuit. In fact, there was more than this that offered offered a degree of support, but this was a snapshot. So you see here the number of states that back Texas. So there is very substantial support for Donald Trump as being the legitimate winner of the presidency. Now, we'll go on here to a series of tweets by Donald Trump. So he's saying swing states that have found massive voter fraud, which is all of them, cannot legally certify these votes as complete and correct without committing a severely punishable crime. Everybody knows that dead people below age people, illegal immigrants, fake signatures, prisoners, and many others have voted illegally. Also, machine glitches, another word for fraud, ballot harvesting, non-resident voters, fake ballots, stuffing the ballot box, votes for pay, roughed up Republican poll watchers, and sometimes even more votes than people voting took place in Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere, all in swing states. So he's talking about it being a severely punishable crime, which suggests he thinks that someone, somewhere, will be able to punish that crime. And he goes on and he says, excuse me a minute, here we go. The votes cannot be certified. This election is under protest. That's a very significant word. It's a common law word. What protest means is if you protest something, it might happen anyway, but you maintain your position to have it reversed later. And I think that's the Trump position. That's what's going to go forward here. He may do something more dramatic. I think it's going to be the telling moment for Donald Trump. Does he roll over to this? I don't see any sign that he will. I think he will see the fight is going on. Whether that goes on with immediate action while he's still president, or whether that goes on with a slower process of resistance after Biden is nominally president, I'm not sure. I suspect it's the latter, but time will tell. But the people who seem to think, the mainstream media sources who seem to think this is just going to go away, I think are delusional. Now, if Donald Trump chooses to do something more dramatic, this brings into question what degree of support he would have from America's military. He was at the Army-Navy football game tossing the coin a few days ago, and we'd like to show you the reaction he got. That support from the military, that's from serving men and women in the Army and the Navy in America, I think that's very significant. That reaction, which was spontaneous and natural and unforced, I think is very significant. It shows where their heart lies. And in summary, I think we're seeing a crisis for the United States of America, one that's not been reported on by the mainstream media, of course, one that's being ignored and scoffed and mocked, but one which is real because the situation is the election's been stolen, it is fraud, and there is the will in America to resist it. And this means that Biden and co will come in and have his 100 days of masking and all sorts of support from the mainstream media, and it won't work. That's if we even get that far.
Indeed.
Biden's not in office yet. We will have to see and watch this very carefully.
Yeah, David, thank you very much. I think that piece on America is fully justified. As you say, things very serious there. But we also want to say to our American audience, we know you're there. We know that you've joined in with watching the UK column and our analysis. That's very much appreciated. We're also watching these momentous events in the States.
We will do an extra in a few minutes, so if you give us 10 minutes, if you're on the live stream on the UK column website, then we'll do a short extra.
Indeed. Can we also encourage people are starting to do it, but this is your opportunity to be able to send in an email with questions to ask us what we think, or to clarify things, or to challenge us, and that's a facility now available, so please use it. Okay, thanks for joining us, UK Column News. We will be back at the same time
on Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.